Usually when you open up like an old family photo album, there's this underlying expectation of permanence, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like you flip to a page from maybe 1985, and there's your uncle with that terrible, undeniable, bushy mustache.
Right, the classic 80s look.
Exactly. You point at it, you laugh, and you say, there it is. That happened. That is our history.
It's a frozen anchor point. I mean, we rely on our history to just stay exactly where we left it.
But imagine you open that exact same photo album tomorrow, and your uncle's mustache is just, well, it's gone.
Wait, like completely erased?
Completely gone. Not only is it gone, but he's suddenly this 20-something tech billionaire. And the faded Kodak photo is suddenly a crisp digital print dated, 2011.
Oh, wow.
And your grandmother is sitting on the couch insisting it has absolutely always been that way. You're holding the physical evidence of a changed past, but the universe around you is acting like you're the crazy one.
That is the absolute definition of a continuity nightmare. Just a total collapse of narrative stability right there.
And it is exactly the kind of structural nightmare we are wading into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are thrilled you could join us for this one.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
Now, before we really get into the weeds, I should probably mention a quick pivot.
Oh, right, the briefing notes.
Yeah. So I know some of the preliminary briefing notes for today suggested we'd be tackling Marvel's sliding timescale. The mechanics of Magneto's helmet, the Hawk's psychological trauma, all that stuff.
Which is fascinating on its own, but...
Right. But when I actually opened up the massive stack of source material we were given, it is entirely focused on the DC universe.
Yeah, literally every page.
Exactly. It's all about the physics of the Speed Force, multiversal collapse, Batman's psychological breaking points. So we're just tossing out that original Marvel prompt entirely and following the actual evidence in front of us. Because the DC continuity is, honestly, a uniquely fascinating labyrinth.
It really is. I mean, it is a sprawling, almost century-long experiment in collaborative storytelling.
So what are we actually looking at today?
Well, we are pulling from a few different things. Official DC historical timelines, incredibly detailed, fan-driven explainer threads from Reddit, the ones that try to map out all these universe-shattering reboots.
Those Reddit threads are intense.
No, they're essentially academic papers at this point. And speaking of which, we also have an actual master's thesis by Travis John Landhus that analyzes Batman through the lens of a, quote, postmodern fairy tale.
So our mission today is really to figure out how a fictional universe survives almost a century of continuous publication.
Right.
We want to understand how comic book continuity evolved from these simple one-off pulp tales into a sprawling architecture of multiverses and something called hypertime.
Which is a trip to explain, let me tell you.
I can't wait. And most importantly, we are going to explore why viewing these iconic heroes as fragmented postmodern fairy tales isn't just like an academic exercise. It is actually the ultimate key to understanding their enduring psychological appeal. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because this audience already knows Superman and Batman have been around since the late 1930s.
38 and 39, yeah.
Right, we all know the foundational myths. But if you have characters who supposedly fought in World War II, how do you explain them still being like energetic 20-somethings during the Cold War?
Yeah, the mathematical friction of time passing is really the catalyst for everything that follows, because DC practically invented the concept of different eras, or, ages in comic book history. They were the first ones to really hit this wall.
So they had the Golden Age first.
Right, the Golden Age in the late 30s and 40s. But by the 1950s, the superhero genre was, well, it was kind of losing its cultural momentum.
People were moving on.
Exactly. So to survive, the publisher ushered in the Silver Age by fundamentally modernizing the cast for a science fiction-obsessed audience.
They just swapped them out.
Pretty much. They introduced Barry Allen as the new Flash, completely replacing the original 1940s Flash, Jay Garrick.
Wow.
Yeah, and they brought in Hal Jordan as the new Green Lantern.
And then as we move into the 1970s Bronze Age, the tone shifts yet again.
Right, things get gritty.
Yeah, the storytelling matures, injecting these darker, more socially conscious themes. Suddenly you have storylines where Green Arrow discovers his teenage ward is struggling with drug addiction.
Which was a massive deal at the time.
Huge deal. So I'm looking at this progression, and I keep visualizing it like a massive collaborative software program.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Like you've got a core code base written in 1938. By the time you get to the 70s, hundreds of different developers. So successive generations of writers and artists have been adding lines of code, deleting legacy features, writing hasty patches.
Just layering code on top of code.
Exactly. And eventually, the code gets so bloated with contradictory logic that the whole program just threatens to crash. I mean,
Yeah.
Superman can't be perpetually 29 years old if he's fought Nazis and is now listening to disco.
Yeah, the tech debt just becomes insurmountable at that point. But if you just wipe the hard drive and start over, you alienate the readers who invested decades into those original stories.
Right, you can't just delete their childhoods. So instead of just starting over, how do they explain the old versions of these characters still existing alongside the new ones?
Well, the ingenious solution to that specific software bug was the invention of the multiverse, which actually traces back to a landmark comic from 1961.
Flash number 123, right?
Exactly, titled The Flash of Two Worlds.
This is where they actually explain the mechanics of how two versions of the same hero can exist. The Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen, he alters his molecular vibration frequency.
Yeah, it's very pseudoscience. He vibrates his molecules at a specific resonance, which allows him to kind of phase out of his reality and accidentally cross over into a parallel dimension.
And in that parallel space, he meets Jay Garrick.
The original Golden Age Flash from the 1940s, yep.
Which is just such an elegant narrative patch. I mean, it validates both the legacy code and the new update simultaneously.
It really was. The writers established that the older World War II-era heroes lived on a parallel dimension dubbed Earth 2, while the modern younger heroes lived on Prime Earth, or Earth 1.
That's brilliant.
It was a huge structural breakthrough. It allowed creators to tell contemporary stories without invalidating the beloved history of the Golden Age. They even instituted these annual crossover events where the Justice League of Earth 1 would vibrate over and team up with the Justice Society of Earth 2.
But, any engineer will tell you that a workaround isn't a permanent fix.
No, definitely not.
If you establish that vibrating at different frequencies opens up new Earths, the natural creative impulse is to just keep generating them.
Oh, and they did.
Right, because if you have two Earths, the logic dictates you can have three. Or an Earth where the heroes are evil syndicates. Or, I don't know, an Earth where everyone is an anthropomorphic cartoon animal.
Which is exactly what happened. The proliferation was staggering. I mean, the multiverse concept was brilliant in '61, but as decades passed, the sheer volume of alternate realities became a complete logistical nightmare.
I can imagine.
If you were a new reader picking up a comic in, say, 1983, trying to figure out which Superman you were reading, like the married one, the young one, the evil one, you practically needed a spreadsheet just to understand the stakes of a single issue.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. The continuity was just collapsing under its own weight.
So, to stick with our software analogy, DC realizes their servers are just groaning under the weight of thousands of conflicting databases.
Yeah, they had to do something drastic.
So in 1985, they launched this massive 12-issue event called Crisis on Infinite Earths. And instead of just writing another patch, they initiate a brutal, forced server migration.
A literal cosmic entity wipes out the multiverse.
Right. The writers merged the 5 most popular parallel Earths into one single unified master timeline. They essentially overwrote the duplicate files and permanently erased any characters or histories that didn't fit the new streamlined canon.
Yeah, the intent was to give the audience a consistent, easily understandable universe. Writer Marv Wolfman really envisioned this clean slate.
But merging databases is never clean.
No, and as the Reddit explainer threads in our sources meticulously document, merging 5 distinct databases inevitably corrupts the dependencies.
Right.
You create orphaned character backgrounds. Like, if Superman is suddenly the sole survivor of his planet again, but he was previously interacting with a cousin from another timeline, how does that cousin exist in the new continuity?
So the glitches just compound.
Exactly the problem. It triggered this exhausting cycle of structural resets. Less than a decade later, in 1994, DC attempted a storyline called 0 Hour.
Which was what, another patch?
Yeah, a literal attempt to patch time anomalies left over from Crisis.
Yeah.
But it largely just generated more entropy.
And the timeline of these fixes just seems to accelerate, right?
Oh, completely.
Because in 2005, we get Infinite Crisis, where the mechanics actually shatter the single universe and bring the multiverse back.
Mostly because writers felt creatively stifled without parallel worlds.
Right. And then in 2011, there's the New 52. And this wasn't a patch. This was a hard format of the drive.
Total wipe.
They use a time travel event called Flashpoint, where Barry Allen goes back in time to save his mother from being murdered. And the temporal shockwave of that single change shattered the timeline, allowing DC to wipe out decades of history and restart almost every single comic back at issue #1.
With a very glaring financially motivated exception.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because the Batman and Green Lantern franchises were top sellers, DC leadership basically decided to let those specific characters keep most of their sprawling, decades-long continuity, while every other hero started from scratch.
Right. If the whole point of a reboot, going all the way back to '85, is to simplify things for the reader, doesn't hitting the reset button every decade just make it infinitely more confusing?
You would think so, yeah.
Especially if you are selectively preserving the history of a few characters while erasing the memories of their best friends. You're asking an audience to invest emotionally, only to tell them a decade later, actually none of that happened. But wait, it did for Batman, just not for Superman.
Right.
That seems like it would just alienate the audience entirely.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the writers themselves recognize the absurdity of this constant rewriting, which is why they introduced a new metaphysical concept to explain the chaos organically. Enter hypertime.
Okay, hypertime. Which sounds like something a theoretical physicist pitches to get a grant. But in this context, how does it actually function compared to the multiverse?
So the sources break down this architecture into what they call the divine continuum, operating on two distinct axes.
Okay.
If the multiverse represents space, meaning parallel, concurrent dimensions separated by vibrational frequencies like Earth 1 and Earth 2,
Got it.
then hypertime represents time. It is the collection of branching, divergent timelines stemming off of one single universe.
So if the multiverse is like looking at different rivers flowing parallel to each other, hypertime is like looking at a single river that constantly splinters off into smaller creeks and tributaries based on like rocks in the water.
That is an excellent visualization. The sources actually use the movie Back to the Future Part 2 as an analogy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, when Biff Tannen steals the sports almanac and changes the past, he creates a dark, alternate 1985. That dark 85 isn't a parallel dimension in space. It's a hypertime branch stemming from a single altered event in the timeline.
Okay, that makes sense.
So in DC Comics, when someone alters the past, they create a massive hypertime branch.
But the crucial mechanic of a river is that tributaries often flow back into the main current.
Precisely.
Wow.
Hypertime branches can eventually heal, converging back into the main timeline.
Ah.
This provided an incredibly elegant philosophical fix. It allowed creators to argue that the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the post-crisis era, and the New 52 all technically happened to the same core characters.
Because they just branched and remerged.
Exactly. The events were just temporarily separated by the diverging currents of hypertime before bleeding back into the main reality.
Okay, so hypertime and vibrational multiverses provide the mechanical sci-fi explanations for the publisher's logistical problem.
Right, the in-universe logic.
But what we really need to look at is the psychological toll. I mean, what does this endless cycle of death, rebirth, and temporal retconning actually do to the characters who have to live through it?
It's heavy stuff.
Because carrying the subconscious weight of 5 different erased lifetimes is a staggering amount of psychological baggage.
This is exactly the crux of Travis John Lantus's master's thesis. He argues that trying to map superheroes as cohesive, realistically evolving humans is just a flawed approach.
Okay, so how should we view them?
We have to start viewing them through the lens of postmodern fairy tales.
Let's ground this by looking at Batman's origin. Everyone knows the iconography, right? Bruce Wayne, the dark alley, the mugger, the gun, the pearls scattering on the pavement.
Right, it's etched into our culture.
But the sources highlight that this origin isn't a fixed historical event. It is constantly shifting. Like that specific iconic imagery of Martha Wayne's pearl necklace shattering.
Yeah.
That visual didn't even exist in the lore until Frank Miller wrote The Dark Knight Returns in 1986.
Wait, really? It feels like it's always been there.
I know, but the cultural details morph with every retelling. And the movie the Wayne family went to see before the murder changes depending on the era, too.
Oh, that's right. Sometimes it's the classic The Mark of Zorro.
Right.
But in other iterations, it's a fictional pulp hero called the Grey Ghost.
There's even this crazy metafictional nod to this in an episode of the animated Harley Quinn series.
No, I love that show. What happens in that one?
They literally travel inside Bruce Wayne's mind. And he is trapped in this repressed mental loop. He's just watching his parents die over and over again. But the details shift slightly every time.
That is dark.
It's a horrific, traumatizing Groundhog Day.
Well, that mental loop perfectly illustrates Lantus's thesis. He draws heavily on the work of postmodern author Robert Coover.
How is that?
He wrote these experimental, fragmented fairy tales, like Briar Rose and Stepmother. Coover's core argument is that contemporary fairy tales do not have one single authoritative narrative.
Right, they're always changing.
Exactly. When you tell the story of Sleeping Beauty today, you aren't just reciting a plot. You're simultaneously engaging with the Disney adaptation, the Grimm brothers text, the much darker original folktales, and every other cultural iteration that has ever permeated our collective consciousness.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because you're saying the character is less of a singular person and more of like a cultural echo chamber.
Exactly. Lanhus uses the term mythos.
Mythos.
Contemporary icons like Batman don't possess a traditional, cohesive identity. They are an amalgamation, an mythos, of every contradictory story ever told about them.
So everything counts.
Yes. The 1950s Batman, who cheerfully fought rainbow-colored aliens, is just as much a structural pillar of the mythos as the grim, heavily armored street vigilante of the 2000s.
That completely reframes the reading experience.
Right.
We're not just reading a serialized adventure anymore. We're watching a fictional character suffer from continuity-induced schizophrenia.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if I woke up tomorrow and suddenly possessed the vivid memories of a past where I was like a 1950s sci-fi adventurer, and that was layered on top of another past where I was a gritty 1980s detective, the cognitive dissonance would just shatter my mind.
Oh, absolutely. And the trauma of continuity is a very real concept within the texts themselves, most notably explored by writer Grant Morrison.
Morrison is a legend.
Oh, yeah. Morrison recognized that characters within these universes suffer from a deep subconscious awareness of their own fractured histories. Like in Morrison's acclaimed run on the comic Animal Man, they utilize a villain named Psychopirate who is locked away in an asylum.
Okay, why is he in the asylum?
Well, the reason for his insanity is deeply tragic. Because of his specific powers, he actually remembers the parallel worlds that were deleted during Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh, man. So he remembers the corrupted files, the database migration.
Exactly.
He is carrying the grief for universes and billions of people that the universe officially dictates never even existed.
And the isolation of that knowledge just completely drives him mad. Morrison applies a similar psychological pressure cooker to Batman in the storyline Batman R.I.P.
How so?
Morrison forces the modern, ultra-serious Batman to confront the buried, campy elements of his 1950s publication history. Concepts like the International Club of Heroes or the whimsical Batmite.
Oh, the really goofy stuff.
Right. But Morrison treats these old, embarrassing stories not as non-canon mistakes, but as repressed psychological trauma.
That is brilliant.
The sheer crushing weight of trying to reconcile his own contradictory publishing history causes Bruce Wayne to suffer a total psychological breakdown.
Because the human mind, I mean, even a fictional peak condition one, simply lacks the capacity to hold that many conflicting realities at once.
Yes. And to survive this complete mental collapse, Bruce Wayne's brain triggers a repressed, chaotic backup persona known as the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
A backup persona?
Yeah. To survive the narrative pressure of the present, he essentially has to embrace the most bizarre, fragmented, and seemingly illogical parts of his own history.
Which fundamentally indicts the entire corporate strategy of comic book reboots, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, when the publisher hits the reset button and erases history to clean up the timeline for marketability, they aren't actually helping the character.
Yeah. By severing them from their mythos, they are effectively lobotomizing them.
That is exactly right. If we connect this to the bigger picture of why stories matter, trying to fix continuity by enforcing a rigid, linear history is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the medium.
The messiness is the point.
The fragmentation is the character. Morrison explores this explicitly in a deeply philosophical comic called Flex Mentala.
I am not familiar with that one.
In that story, a character named Wally Sage is dying, and as he faces the end, he comes to a profound realization about the multiverse. He argues that these messy, constantly retconned comic book histories aren't just corporate intellectual property.
What are they then? They are, in his words, crude attempts to remember the truth about reality.
Wow. So what does this all mean? Why does diving into the logistical headaches of an 80-year-old comic book company matter to you, listening to this right now?
That's a fair question.
You probably aren't vibrating your molecules to access a parallel Earth, obviously. But just like Batman, you have distinct, often contradictory past versions of yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
You have the childhood version of you, the awkward teenage version,
Yeah.
the version of you that made terrible, embarrassing mistakes in your 20s.
We all have those, and modern culture often encourages us to act exactly like a comic book publisher managing a brand.
Yes.
We try to institute our own personal reboots, we move to a new city, we change our careers, we curate a flawless social media feed, and we attempt to completely erase our past, basically pretending those older, messier versions of ourselves simply don't exist anymore.
We desperately want a clean continuity.
Right.
We want to be the streamlined New 52 version of ourselves, entirely free of legacy baggage. But what Landhu's thesis on postmodern fairy tales and Morrison's psychological comic runs argue is that genuine growth doesn't come from a hard reboot.
No, it really doesn't.
It doesn't come from erasing your history. It comes from the difficult work of integrating all those messy, contradictory past selves, even the ones with the terrible mustaches, into who you are today. Acknowledging the fragmentation is the only way to build a complete, resilient mythos of yourself.
It is a profoundly empathetic way to view our own personal histories. And, looking at this incredibly human, flawed process of collaborative storytelling raises a final, provocative thought, something that wasn't explicitly covered in the academic text but feels incredibly urgent today.
Okay, lay it on me.
If comic book continuity is essentially a messy, century-long human attempt to construct modern mythology, what happens to that mythology when artificial intelligence enters the chat?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating collision of concepts.
Right. Consider the logistics. If you fed all 80 years of DC Comics history into an advanced AI, it could theoretically track every single hypertime branch perfectly.
It could fix everything.
It could erase every plot hole, reconcile every timeline, and generate a flawlessly cohesive continuity without a single logistical error. But if a machine did that, would it actually create the ultimate superhero story? Or, by stripping away the messy, contradictory, deeply flawed human element of generations of writers arguing with each other on the page, would it fundamentally destroy the soul of the modern fairy tale?
Are the plot holes, the retcons, and the bizarre contradictions actually the very mechanics that make the mythology human in the first place?
That's the question.
That is a fantastic question to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember to check your own internal continuity from time to time.
Embrace the messy history.
And the next time you open up that family photo album and you see a version of yourself or your uncle that feels like a completely different person from another dimension, well, don't try to erase them from the timeline. Just accept that they're a vital, foundational part of your own deeply complicated